All right, I'm just gonna finish up talking about chapter 5 here. Um, the most important thing I realized in chapter 5 is that Jung really has two different ideas of what introversion is. Well, no, not necessarily two ideas, but there are different sorts of introversion for Jung. And I don't think he has them completely differentiated. And part of this is the fact that the nature of what he's doing in psychological types is sort of taking a survey of how these psychological processes have shown up in different cultural movements or whatever, philosophy and poetry and whatnot. So it's sort of interesting. In the chapter 1, the introversion is sort of like introverted thinking in chapter 1, and then which is the type problem in philosophy, and the idea there is like introversion is attention to the idea, and like the idea is the real thing, whereas extroversion is attention to really just the instantiation, and kind of the idea is more of an abstraction. And in that case, it's related to thinking, because I think thinking really has to do with classification, and like, does this thing fit in this thing? I think that's kind of just the nature of what thinking is. It's like classes, I think, at its most basic. And then in the type problem in poetry chapter, which is chapter 5, which is really, really long, it's almost like introversion is more introverted feeling in that chapter, which makes sense, kind of, in dealing with these different domains. He's talking about, like, I have to be faithful to my soul in that chapter. And that's really the presentation of introversion in that chapter, is like, how important being true to yourself is, which is this much more this introverted feeling idea. And then he makes the extroverted side sound just awful. I think it just is like totally soulless. It's like, essentially, if you were to take the thing that Christ says about what profit is it for a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul, and you're just like, yeah, the extrovert is the guy who decides it's a good idea to sell your soul and gain the whole world, whereas the introvert's good. He's got it. He's got his soul still, at least. So I don't think that it's works out like that. I think that what Jung presents in chapter 1 is more relevant to thinking about how introversion interacts with the functions, which is to say that, like, in chapter 1, this idea of how something moves into unity is really key, and you can do that with every one of the functions. Like, every one of the functions can have this kind of unifying relationship to what it's interacting with. But it's hard to see how what he's presenting in chapter 5 can kind of accommodate discussions of the functions. Like, you're really loyal to your I don't know, to your definitions, and I guess you could make a case for that. Like, for the introverted thinking type, they're cold. They're really loyal to their cold soul. So yeah, I think that my position on that the chapter 1 idea, where the idea of the thing is what introversion is attempted to. I think that ends up being kind of how people talk about the functions today. Like, you don't, like, socionics is such a clear example of it. Like, it's a cognitive thing in socionics. I think, so I think it's fine to have another kind of introversion, which is like this idea of being faithful to your own soul and not selling out for the world. But I think it's really important for those to be differentiated, because I as an extrovert am very 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 in tune with kind of nigglings of my soul, and I'm very kind of faithful to following that what Jung would call libido. I call it the Holy Spirit, but yeah, that's the main thing that I wanted to differentiate. There is a relationship between this idea of unity and the soul, because when he's talking about Meister Eckhart, like how going within it brings out the libido in it brings out the goodness of the world as well. Like, if you lose that inward thing, and then everything else in the world, that inward spark, everything else in the world fades into this kind of dull experience. So that's the relationship to unity. It's that this precious, this pearl of great price, is this small little thing in you, but it has this kind of like acorn effect that it affects everything, and that's what's going on with introversion. Generally, it's like it's this attention to the thing that really matters, the thing that holds things together. So yeah, that's kind of all my comments. That's really the only important thing that I think needs to be said about chapter 5, is just differentiating these two ideas of introversion and extroversion. I mean, it really does help you kind of bracket what we're talking about. Like, oh, this extroverted person is a monk. Like, that's weird. It's like, no. There's sort of like a cognitive introversion and extroversion, and then there's like a spiritual introversion and extroversion. And in the spiritual version of introversion and extroversion, it doesn't really have to do with. It doesn't seem to me that it has to do anything to do with the cognitive stuff. Basically, yeah. I think a loud extrovert can go be a monk, and as Jung says, like, artificially introvert his libido. There was one more thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, this birth of the symbol idea. It's pretty interesting to think about this stuff in combination with the Gospels. I think this pattern of unity and multiplicity is so basic that and the images in the Gospel are so basic, like so earthy and familiar, that having those two very basic patterns kind of helps you see this, and it is why Jung is seeing this everywhere. Like, I mean, if I can digress for a little bit, it's a brilliant idea. Like, the pattern of unity and multiplicity is so global, is so universal, so present in every symbology, to then make it a psychological difference between people, that like some people are more attentive to other people, to parts of this symbolic reality, and other people are attentive to other parts, is really just a genius move. I think just the only problem with it is that, well, one of the problems with it is just that psychological types is so messy. But the other problem is it's just, he ends up, making that, and I've said this before, not a part of reality itself, just a part of kind of psychological makeup that's just projected onto reality. But yeah, that's all I have to say.